Hey, what is up, YouTube? Kill here, coming at you with a brand new video, and in this video we are going to be picking off right where we left off. Another series between me and Dimaga. And this game did not happen directly after the last one. It was probably a day or so later. But nonetheless, another fun game between myself and Dimaga. And you can see he is opening up the same way, in that extractor trick, just like in the last game. Now, of course, we do have to keep in mind that since this is Legacy of the Void beta, there are some shifting metagame, mind game shenanigans going on. So a lot of the things that work in some games might not work in other games, and it also kind of depends on who you're playing against and so on. But I think this game does a really good job of showcasing a lot of the different aspects of Protoss versus Zerg on a pretty substantially high level of gameplay. Dimaga himself even said that after this game he was pretty impressed with the game and my execution and so on, and he kind of like wanted to know who I was, because obviously I'm not a European player, but it shows that a lot of things can be learned from both sides, and I think it's a pretty good basis for getting ideas of what you can do in Legacy of the Void in Protoss versus Zerg, what does and doesn't work, what may and may not be too strong from an unbiased standpoint. One of the things I see a lot of on Team Liquid right now is a lot of low league players simply espousing opinions about the game when they don't actually have access to it. And it kind of actually, maybe I'll take a minute to address this. Kind of irks me a little bit when you see lower league players not only saying that they know better than other people, but that you should take their advice because they know what they're talking about. And, well, first off, while it is true that lower league players certainly do have opinions that can many times be correct, it is oftentimes the more established or unbiased approach of people who are actually playing the game that you should defer your opinion to. And so there's quite a few things that I would like to talk about in the later stages of this game. But if you are one of those people, I kindly ask you in the early stages of development, especially in games like Legacy of the Void, game we're all looking forward to maybe keep those comments to yourself so that people like David Kim can get the correct response and feedback and take the game in a great direction. So, with that said, checking out the cool stuff that's going on in this game, we already see, bam, super fast Stargate, see mothership core being made, and we see some Zergling speed down here in Dimaga's base, getting up 3 hatches just like in the last game. Our Adept doing a bit more damage in this game than it did in the last game. If you remember, in the previous game, our Adept kind of just got surrounded and died and didn't really do anything other than scout. Generally, about all Adepts are good for in Protoss versus Zerg. Dying right before the Adept could get its Shade ability off. Trying to pick off his Overlord just like in the last game, however, that doesn't go so well this time. Sneaky Zergling does get 1 kill. However, we are seeing a bit of a different approach. We saw in our last game that we went for Gate, Forge, and Blink. In this game, we are going for the good old, reliable Phoenix Opener. Of course, we have our Mothership Core here to protect. We didn't have this guy in the last game. Lost our Stalker. But we are showing some really awesome pro production. Not cutting any corners this game. Get out any defense. We know what is on the way. Just Zerglings. Dimaga just about saturated on all 3 bases already. To keep in mind how different the progression of things are in the early game of Legacy of the Void. You see some Spore Crawlers going down. This is what I was talking about with the mind game kind of thing. Yes, keep in mind that last time we played, I did go Dark Templar. Caught him off guard quite a bit. Got myself quite a lead. Building up 3 Phoenix. Usually when you have 3, you move out, just in case they have any push coming. Adding on a Twilight Council as well. flying out with those Phoenix now. Dimaga adding on his gas, getting that Roach Warren up. Unfortunately, finding my pylon in the top right, or I guess great for him if you are rooting for the Zerg. We see a Void Ray in production and adding on some gateways. We also see that they are moving out to take our third base. Picking up this Queen. Generally, you do want to get drones as a Protoss player opening Phoenix, just so you can even up the economy a bit. However, Queens are quite a good trade as well. Never want to count out how much injects do to the economy and production of a Zerg player, as well as creep spread. Very important. And baiting out another Queen over here, while getting our third base up here. We are adding on a Dark Shrine and Void Rays. And just doing as much damage as we can. Picking off some of those drones now. We can see in the units tab we have 47 to 63 workers. So while we are a little bit behind on workers, we are getting up our third base. Dimaga moving across the map with quite a few Zerglings. Not very many units back here to defend. We do have one Void Ray though. Sentries over at our natural. And some not so reactive force fields, but Zergling's not so good versus Void Rays, if you didn't know. And just about evened up the worker count here, a little bit behind, but what really matters is that we've established a third base. And we also have a little bit of tech on the way, so that's great. So flying around with these Phoenix being annoying. Most important thing is keeping them alive. We can see in the upper left we are getting some Cybernetics Core air upgrades, meaning we are going to be transitioning into air. Dimaga himself looks like he's going for a Spire. And already you can see it, this phase of the game, only a few minutes in, about 8 minutes I believe, we are already mining out the main base for the Zerg player. Protoss a little bit behind on that, adding on those 2 extra gateways. We can see 14 Corruptors in production here, quite a few. We have our DTs coming up here, kind of similar to like a Bisu build, the kind of idea I had in mind here. Get air control with your Phoenix, and kind of deny map control with your Dark Templar. You can see we're adding on a fleet beacon as well. Picking up this drone, not allowing him to get a different location, 4th base. But 14 Corruptors are pretty strong versus Phoenix, if you didn't know. And even stronger against Phoenix that aren't being microed. So only one Phoenix getting out there. A little bit unfortunate. But the damage we've done with the harassment and the Dark Templar is just enough. You can see here that this is something that I do want to take a second to talk about as well. I do think that the new economy actually favors certain races more than others. And this is something that TT1, you may know him as a old Wings of Liberty, I guess also Heart of the Swarm pro player, Protoss player. He mentioned it on Team Liquid. Certain races actually benefit more from getting more minerals early in the game. And so starting with 12 workers actually benefits certain races more. And I think this is a pretty important phase of the game where you can see all of this unit production at once from the Zerg player allows them to build not only all of these Corruptors, but you can see 12 more on the way. And in terms of if he hadn't taken that damage from those DTs, which is more of just unexpected play happening in the game on his end, the area or the amount of progression of Zerg at this point would actually be a lot higher than the ability I have to produce Void Rays at this point in the game. And I definitely think that's something that needs to be emphasized a bit more from Blizzard. We want to make sure that as races progress, Throughout the early, mid, and late stages of the game, there isn't a too far imbalance for one race versus another. That means that they have to progress at a rate that doesn't automatically mean a certain phase of the game. If one race just produces units or just does a certain timing attack, there's literally no way to defend against it. And while that doesn't happen in this game, it is something that you should just keep in mind as a player watching the game, as a player maybe to get invited to the beta soon. Definitely want to keep that at the top of the feedback list. Want to make sure that all things are progressing moderately equally for races, and you give back the appropriate feedback. But back to the game, we can see we are building up quite a carrier army and getting some zealot speed down in the bottom. Also adding on another base, some gateways, and fortifying our bases with photon cannons. If you guys have been paying attention to some of the things said by some of the better players on forums, it seems like static defense is going to be quite a bit more important in the later stages of the game, as you have a lot of extra minerals to spend. You can see Dimaga right now has 2,000, but a lot more areas to defend. So you have to be a little bit careful with your bases as you start to branch out. You can see here that supplies are starting to even up, and we do have some really nice carriers, +2 about to finish, and 3 more carriers on the way. You can see these DTs being really effective throughout the whole of this game. Something I was thinking about while I was doing this build was there should be a time, or at least some point in the game, when it would not be a bad idea to add on a robotics bay, or robotics, and that's just to do things like clear this creep. If you guys are not aware, the Oracle does not do such a great job of assisting air armies anymore, specifically because the Revelation ability only hits certain targets. And because it only hits certain targets, that means you can't kind of fly around with it with your creep. It would only detect one creep tumor, and that would be it. So, you can see here adding on 2 robotics facilities now. Again, reinforcing our bases with extra minerals that we have. Running some zealots over in the top right. We see Dimaga adding on Ravagers here. Getting up some more upgrades. Moving out on the map here, we see some hallucinated Void Rays. And this is something I think I probably should have waited a little bit more for. We see some Void Rays trading with some Corruptors. However, most of what we have left is just 3 carriers and only 7 Void Rays, few of which are not with our army right now. So although we did do a moderately good trade there, you can see that the army is actually not doing so hot anymore. We lost a lot of key units that are hard to rebuild, while it's easier for Zerg to just produce those Corruptors all at once. We do have a little bit of a resource lead now in the army, but you have to keep in mind it does take quite a substantial time to build carriers. Of course, their build time has been reduced in Legacy of the Void. But with an army like this, it's always better to attack with a 200 army, and deciding to move over to try and clear some creep tumors, probably not the best idea. You can see Dimaga still on these 3 bases. Doesn't actually have very many workers anymore, down to 47. And we are trying to expand to the bottom left. You have to keep in mind, though, with the corrosive bile, what was kind of going on in that last battle was the Corruptors came in to attack, while the corrosive bile kind of made it a bad idea for my army to stand in one position. So this matchup of Corruptors and Ravagers is actually quite good, even versus air. Of course, if corrosive bile hits anything, even robotics or air units, does quite a bit of damage. Right there we saw the Corruptors using their new ability, I'm actually not sure, Caustic Spray, to take out a Nexus. And this is something I'm actually not too sure about. it's kind of a good idea that corruptors don't become useless once you've made so many of them, but at the same time, that Nexus dies pretty fast, and for the amount of health corruptors have, there's not really a way to deny something like that from happening unless you are there already. Which, again, kind of compounds the issue of expanding away and also the issue of getting more bases quicker in Legacy of the Void, because the chances of you being at the location to defend one of your Nexus versus one of the others goes down as the game progresses. So, just things you need to keep in mind. We do see here that we do have a substantial army lead at this point in the game. 189 supply to 149. We can see that we are up to 11 Void Rays, 5 Carriers versus 25 Corruptors and 10 Ravagers. Again, though, we have to keep in mind that these Ravagers do quite a bit of damage. 60 damage for each corrosive vial that hits. So if you stack up 10 of those, all of a sudden you've got 600 damage. And that's more than enough to kill a carrier. So definitely have to be careful with your army positioning at this phase in the game. Even a few trades like this for free, you can see just a spell versus buildings is a good trade. You can see here we're shooting out some of the interceptors for the carriers. Of course, this does cost some minerals. However, the good thing is that it does give you a little bit of vision, can help you to fortify a position, and if you are choosing to fight at that location, essentially is like adding extra interceptors to the area that are fighting, because your carriers will be rebuilding and then fighting in that same area. So some very interesting things there. It does, I don't know what this is. Oh, it actually has a icon, which has not been made yet. Interesting. So we can see Dimaga getting up to quite a few of these Vipers. Of course, Vipers do have the new spell Parasitic Bomb, which does an insane amount of damage. It's 90 over 13 seconds, and it's an AoE spray. And we also see the Tempest Disintegration spell coming into play here. In the latest patch, you can actually not do any sort of transfuse on buildings or units that have been hit by this spell. So you can see here, they just kind of die off. One of those shots does do more damage than a Spine Crawler or Spore Crawler's health. So this Ninja Ravager Defender just shooting at stuff, man. He doesn't care. He's like, yo, come back here, fight me, bro. So we did. We came back and we killed him. Good job, team. So you can see that Corrosive Bioman does a lot of damage. If I had taken those second volleys, that would have definitely have been quite some trouble on those Tempests. You see quite a bit of damage coming up here in this space in the top right. At the same time, we're coming back down here with our Disintegrations, shooting onto the hatchery. But man, these Ravagers don't mess around. Only losing one to that whole army of Zealots and our Templar. It seems like at this point I should have probably been attacking. I have a maxed army, and it is quite a strong air army. Perhaps should have added on Storm a little bit faster. You can see our Interceptors coming out here. I think it would be pretty neat if you could control the Interceptors after they've been released. You can see here we're actually picking up quite a few Vipers, killing I think about 3 or 4 of them there. Looks like Dimaga wants to come in here. Got a ton of Corruptors, and we see this Viper AoE damage kind of broken, actually. That's exactly what that is, I think. Not really sure what you can do in that situation. I thought I split quite well there. Even still, not quite enough to negate the damage that was done by it. Perhaps having Storm would have made it Storm or Feedback, could have prevented the damage there. But if those things land, man, your air army is gone, no problem. So, in an act of desperation, we see ourselves moving across the map here with our small force of Stalkers and Immortals. However, these Corruptors, as I said, can always just run across the map, deal damage to buildings. Zerglings, of course, rather good versus Stalkers. Corrosive Bile, not a thing to mess around with either. And even though we're trading pretty well here, Zerglings are pretty awesome themselves. We're being quite a few Stalkers here, but Corruptors don't mess around, man. Once they get to that second increased 20-second or 20 damage per second or whatever that is, not really much a chance a structure has of surviving that. And we can see the strategic implications it has in the late game. You just trade spell energy, or not even a spell energy, just an ability charge for a Nexus. And we were in otherwise a pretty good position. It was one base versus one base, though we made a bit of a bad trade with Zerglings and Stalkers. We still would have been rather fine. But Corruptors alone changing the fate of this game. Also killing a Templar Archives. Quite a bit of gas, which at this point in the game is very expensive. Another Nexus goes down. And like I said earlier, you have to have your units down here to protect one of your bases, but at the same time, Corruptors in the late game can just kind of fly around and kill shit. Pretty frustrating. What can you do, though? So we see here we're just moving out, trying to get whatever we can done with these Stalkers. We do have another army lead, so the game isn't over just yet. You have to keep in mind that while these Corruptors are flying around and being a pain in the ass, they can only target buildings with their ability. And we are establishing our base once again in the bottom left. So the game isn't over just yet. Clearing up this creep, very important. Making sure we have a certain level of map presence. Once again, rebuilding our Templar Archives. We can see Dimaga's army in the right side of the map. A lot of Zerglings, Ravagers, building up a wall so you can take this base in the top right, clearing all the vision of Dimaga's from the middle of the map. We can see here, feel pretty comfortable taking another base while we are a little bit low on gas. We do have a little bit of mineral to spare. And once again, these Corruptors, they don't care, man. They are here to fight. And unfortunately, Nexus can't fight back versus Corruptors, so I'll just let that sadness sink in as a Protoss player for all of those watching. But that said, we are still rather close in the supply count. We have some Zealots coming down here. Gonna try and deal whatever damage we can to the main base of Dimaga. See all these Zerglings running over here to defend. Again, these Corruptors doing whatever they can. Now, of course, in Heart of the Swarm, it is pretty important to kill whatever tech buildings you can of the Zerg player, but in Legacy of the Void, killing a Roach Warren does prevent the Zerg player from warping in these Ravagers, which are quite a bit more important than Roaches will ever be. We see one really good blinding cloud completely changing how much damage is done by the army of the Protoss player. The Vipers just being so important at this phase of the game. And we can see these Ravagers behind the Roaches just doing insane damage. Just melting away the Protoss army. Even with Immortals, which counter armored units, it doesn't really seem like trades are going too much in our direction. And even though the army's supply was probably in favor of myself on the ground, due to how many Corruptors there are here. It doesn't really seem to matter, and on top of that, the corruptors kill the Nexus. So we are down to a total of 1 Nexus mining, 75 and 340 minerals. We did kill the base in the top right. Dimaga coming down here to check out this base. So the Protoss tears flowing. David, Kim, why have you forsaken your Protoss brethren? Dimaga, why? Why are you throwing up on my buildings, Dimaga? Have some respect. Blink Stalkers doing what they can to defend our little worker buddies. Dimaga confused, not quite sure what's going on. He does feel the power of the Ravager and Corruptor, though. Coming in to trade here. He does have this base over here mining a little bit of minerals. And that little bit does seem to be enough to produce an ample amount of Zerglings to continuously trade effectively. Have to keep in mind that trading moderately effectively versus just terribly is always better. The Zerg player here, especially if they're mining a little bit. You see those Corruptors actually just kind of wrecking cannons, which is kind of sad. More Zerglings on the way. And Dimaga at this point is just making units. He knows that if I have no mining bases, he can just keep making stuff and eventually I'll run out of stuff. Just some basic RTS game sense. And the real key to his victory in this game has been these Corruptors, man. They have really been doing some economic damage, which is not really something you see very much from Zerg players in Heart of the Swarm. You see players like Life trying to do Zergling run-bys and so on, but never something like drops or anything, and really it just kind of seems like that's the kind of role the Corruptor is filling. And I don't know, down to 8 supply at this point, not really any chance to make any kind of comeback. I would like to say at this point, I do feel that the Caustic Spray does have some unintended trade effects in the late game, as you can see here. While an ability like this I do think is pretty awesome, you never really want to have abilities that trade for free. I think it's very disastrous in these late game situations, especially when it doesn't cost any energy or anything like that. On the same token, I also think that not only is the Caustic Bile or Corrosive Bile for the Ravagers very strong against robotic and air units for Protoss, but also the economic changes, starting workers, all seem to kind of point in the direction of giving an edge to the Zerg player all throughout the game. Now, of course, there are still some things to be found out in Legacy of the Void, but I think these fundamental issues kind of have to be addressed. I think no matter which player or who, what is going on in the game, unless these kind of basic features change, there will always be an edge in one race's favor. Right now, it seems to be Zergs in the matchup. If it ever happens for Protoss, of course, you have to call it how it is. Anyway, I hope some of the information in this game was pretty helpful for you guys. I hope you enjoyed the replay. I have some more replays, which I will be casting tomorrow and then uploading following these replays. So hopefully you guys enjoy them. As always, like, favorite, subscribe, check out my Twitch channel. I really appreciate all support. And as always, thank you for watching. Peace.